Hi, it's Wayne O'Keefe. I'm fishing the Maribyrnong River this morning in a fish off. What I'm doing is I'm looking at the performance of two rods that I have just to see which I think is better for these waters. I've got one on my left, which is a 2.1 meter light spinning rod. It's graphite. The line capacity is about 1 to 3 kilos, so it's very fine. I'm using 2 kilo line on that. Fishing these waters of the Maribyrnong where there's lots of fish, there's small fish, you get that sensation of game fishing, you know, you get to feel the smaller fish, you get to feel that the fight and all with that rod really feels nice and exciting. On the other side, I've got a 3.6 Quivertip rod. That's also graphite with a bit of fiberglass in it. That is reliant on the tip telling you everything that's going on. It's very long, 3.6 meters. I'm using the same line on that, 2 kilo line, and both of these rigs are set up exactly the same. They're a running line, so they've got a burley cage on them which acts as your sinker, and the line can move through that. That stops at a line stop, so it moves up to the line stop. Instead of having a swivel, I have a line stop, and then I have a 45 centimeter leader to a small size 14 hook, which is what I always start with. The bait today is going to be my spicy chicken, it's going to be maggots, and it's going to be prawns. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get some casting out, I'm going to get some burley into the area to attract the fish in, and I'm actually casting the same distance out, and they're probably only, I'd say, about 3 meters apart where they've landed. So I'm going to try and fish those, giving it as much a comparison, so I'm trying to make everything as similar as possible so that I can work out which I think is the better rod on the day. So we'll see how this one goes. Now the rig I'm using, as I said, is a running rig, so it's a running line rig. I've got my burley cage there, and that acts as my sinker. That's running. Stop the line stop through to a 45 centimeter leader, size 14 hook, and as I said, I'm starting with maggots today. Why do I like maggots so much? Well, the fish love them for a start, but look at that. They're white, they've got plenty of movement, and that's why things like brim and mullet and carp and trout love them. So that's the rig for today. Both rods have that. Okay, so I caught something now, and it's probably a brim, just as I was speaking to Alan, as it turns out. And what it is, a brim, I can see it from here. I just have to get down to net this because the line is so light that if I'm not careful, this guy will release himself. Okay, so now I've got to get down there without actually killing myself, which could be a challenge. And there's a potential that this could end up on funniest videos if I go into the water. It is very likely.
Well played.
Is it a brim?
It is a brim. The most difficult part of this whole thing has been getting down and back from the water. Oh, okay. That was great.
Bravo.
Of course he's taken that. Okay, not a bad little fish, little brim. So that's one to the Quivertip. Thanks. Now one thing that's really clear is that the Quivertip rod, the little taps that the fish, or any movement in the water, but the taps of the fish hitting that bait, even the tiniest little things are showing up a lot more than on the spin rod. And this graphite rod's almost twice the size, but I am getting bites now as I see it. But it takes a lot more effort for the fish to actually move the tip of the rod, which means that maybe they feel that resistance and are less likely to pick up. So at the moment, I've got bites on both. I've got one fish on this one simply because I saw the action happening just at the start, was ready for it, and as the moment the tip went round, I struck into it. The other rod is a little bit more jerky, so it's maybe they can feel things and they're just giving up, so I don't get them. They stop after a little while. I stop seeming to bite and they drop the bait after a little while, so they're not committing on that one. The Quivertip seems to be getting that at the moment. Now the flow of the water has picked up a little bit, and it is moving the burley cages along a little bit. Now normally I would change to a heavier burley cage, but because I'm fishing such light line, I don't really want to fish a heavier weight with that because it's just too heavy. It might even break the line as I cast. So I'll just leave that for the time being. It might influence the number of fish that I can attract to the area because I am spreading it by doing that. You really want your burley cage to stop in one area to attract the fish to it. If it's moving around, it spreads that, and the fish are then spread around, so you've got less chances of having the most fish near your bait. Okay, so let's get this in. Okay, to my marker. Okay, so there's getting some action on this rod here. Little hits on the tip, and then they stop, which is what has happened. So the rod on the left, the action is getting more tips. I've probably cast in a few more times to that, but not getting that commitment. Well, I got one on the smaller rod, but I think I might have lost. Oh no, I still got him. But what I had to do is I had to hold it and strike into it because I couldn't. The tip wasn't working well enough. So I held it. I felt the action through the tip, and that's how I got it. Okay, so I got him all right. Not a bad mullet for this water, but unfortunately most of it I was having to feel through the rod, so the tip wasn't moving that much, you know, and so it's by feel rather than with the Quivertip. At least I'm seeing a lot more action there, so I know to be ready on that one. Now I've caught another one. Well, I've hooked one. I don't know if I've caught it yet. I've hooked another one on this rod because I've been casting a bit more frequently, more burley, and I think I'm getting more hits, but they're not hooking themselves, that's for sure, and I am seeing some good action. Okay. Whoa! A bit unsteady on my seat. Okay, so another mullet, and I must admit, at least this shorter rod is much easier to handle. Like I've got a couple of trees around me, so I don't have to worry about the casting, and it's you know, when you're trying to get down to the water and stuff like that, shorter rod's definitely most easier to handle if you're in the trees and stuff. So it does have its advantages that way, and having a little bit more carbon in it than the Quivertip rod, it actually picks the line up quite well. It strikes quite well. Now it's interesting, what's happened is that I must admit I haven't been holding on to the Quivertip rod. I mean, that's not the way you fish them. What you do is you leave that to watch the tip move, and once it bends around you strike into it. With the other rod, I've been holding that. So the advantage is with the other rod at least is once you pick it up, it works much better holding it to strike into the fish. The Quivertip rod is meant to just stay there and be the indicator, and then once it swings around, then you strike. So you don't get as many chances to actually strike into the fish the same way. So using the shorter rod has advantages in that way. Now, one of the baits I'm using today is maggots, and people ask me how I can stand to use them or whatever. Well, I have them I put them into my burley, my dry burley, and the way that I produce them, and I've produced a video on this, on how to raise your own bait. What happens is they do clean themselves out, and then in that burley and that they get a bit of the scent of the burley as well. I just keep them. I put some of that into a container, and so I've got a container like this. It's full of the burley with all of the maggots in it. Okay, I've got a sealed top. I can put that in the fridge and keep them, but they are a fantastic bait for this type of fishing because, as I showed you before, they're wriggling on the bottom. They're a nice white colour and they're wriggling on that hook all the time. That is a great fish attractant. It's sort of like having a lure near your bait. Well, another one on the Quivertip. I saw the tip move, and just as the rod bent, I just struck into it. Now I've just got to get it out of, there's some snags down here. I'll just have to get down with my net. So it's another mullet, good sized mullet, and this was easy. I just see the rod bend around, so I gently pull into it and got it. Great indicator, and I haven't been getting those indications on the other rod. So get this one in. Oh, nearly hit a pigeon. One thing about the long Quivertip rods, or long rods generally, is the casting is so much easier than with the shorter rods. Well, it's just a breeze. So that is a huge advantage on a rod this size, is that while it might be a bit difficult if you're around tree, it is so much easier to cast in. Now I missed that one. That was a bite straight off. I hadn't even put the rod down, but I'll try again. One thing I'll say today is I only start filming actually when I hook a fish. So I've lost a lot of fish today, just not being able to strike into them properly on both rods. But I must admit, I've always liked Quivertip rods. I've started to use the shorter rods to make them a bit easier. Well, they are a bit easier to handle. But look, if you've used longer rods, Quivertip rods, but not just Quivertip rods, just longer rods generally, just let me know. Is that something that you enjoy, the longer rods? And you know, if you've used them with a lot of success, let us know. It'd be great to hear. Well, I hadn't had a bite for a little while, and this is why. This is one of the biggest southern sea stars I've ever caught in my life, but it had covered the bait. And I hadn't had it in there for that long. We're talking about, you know, sort of minutes. So this is the thing. These things are everywhere. They are an introduced species. They are toxic, not to be returned. If you're fishing other places and you're finding the southern sea star is a real problem, let me know so that we can tell others. What spots are you going to where they're really plaguing the area, and you've got to use different techniques to avoid getting them covering your bait all the time. Let us know. I've got to admit that today is perfect conditions for quiver tipping. I've got no breeze whatsoever, so the tip is free to tell me everything that's happening. It's not influenced by any wind. So under those conditions, quiver tipping works very well. If it was windier today and it's moving the tip around because the tip's fiberglass and very sensitive, then I'm not really getting any use out of that indicator. So, and that's when the smaller rod would be better. So it's just an interesting thing. The conditions also have to suit the type of rod you're doing. Well, that's interesting. I wasn't getting bites, so I changed down to from maggots to spicy chicken, and straight away. So rod tip, this is a quiver tip rod tip bent right round, and I'm into a fish if I can get it. So fish number 3 to the quiver tip, but I guess the advantage was I changed baits, so I've got to change baits on the other one as well to make it fair. But it was great. Just saw the rod tip bend right round, struck gently into it, got another one. Well, another one for the quiver tip, and this was pretty definite, the rod tip just going round. So now, this fish had been mucking, well, maybe this fish or others, had been mucking around with that bait for about 2 or 3 minutes. The rod was moving around, I knew everything that was happening. So that was a big advantage there for the quiver tip. And another one to the quiver tip. Now, maybe I'm casting more accurately to this one, but it's really It's really outfishing the other rod by 2 to 1 so now, I think. Yeah, so this mullet, you know, I don't know why it's doing it. I mean, I'm casting the same spot, and if anything, I mean, this should have the disadvantage because I'm actually casting upstream of the other rod, which means any burley that's floating down is going to influence the fish. They'll find the other bait first. So it's upstream of my other rod, the other bait. If they're the same distance out, it should really be the other rod that's doing better. But anyway, who would have thought? Well, I had to hold this rod, the shorter rod, to get a fish. I've got it now. I'll just get it in, see what it is. Probably a mullet, but at least I got another one on this, but had to hold the rod to get it. Yeah, look, they're not hooking themselves today, but anyway, I got this. I saw that the rod was moving a bit, but tiny little, you know, jags. So after basically holding it for a second, I felt it go and pulled into it. You can see the rod. You can see the rod now. I'm getting action on it. The moment I say that, of course, it stops. But oh no, there you go. You can see the tips on it. You can see the little pulls on it. I need that to go right round before I strike into it. So I can't pick that rod up and hold it. It just doesn't work that way. So it's more for holding and waiting for that to bend round. And so the great thing is, even though these are only small movements now, I know there's a fish around, so I'll focus on this. I won't concentrate on the other rod. Just see what I can do as far as getting that fish in. And sometimes this type of activity happens for you know, a minute or 2 minutes even, as the fish decide to take bait or not. Based on the size of that hit, then I think they might have actually taken the bait, but we'll see. Anyway, I know there's action on this rod. Look, the action stopped for a little while, so I changed baits. I put my spicy chicken on, and the bites started coming again. So you know, that's what you've got to do. You've got to change your baits every now and again when things aren't working out for you. Change hook sizes, etc. But that spicy chicken really worked for me. Okay, let's just see the action on this Quivertip rod. There we go. That's it. Okay, which should be my last fish for the day. Anyway, the Quivertip has worked very, very well. It's been great fun. So today, the Quivertip definitely, it outfished the spin rod by about 2 to 1. I got quite a few fish today, it was good. And in a short session, and the Quivertip most definitely did the job. I'd say, look, when I compare the two, the great thing about the Quivertip, and maybe the reason I got more fish on it and probably more bites was because I think the longer rod allows for more accurate casting. Once you get used to it, it does take a little bit of experience, but once you get used to it, the casting is a dream, the accuracy is really, really good. Okay, and then you've got all of the indicators that you need. So it's great that way. And also being long rods can take lighter line, especially long rods that got some flex in them, can take lighter line because the flex of the rod acts as a shock absorber for the line. So it does some of the work. So you can catch, you know, reasonable sized fish that way. And therefore you've got those benefits. The challenges are, it does take a bit more experience to use, and I mean you can because it's so long, you've got a lot. The line can catch around the tip sometimes, and you can, you know, cause damage that way. If it's windy, they're not going to work as well, and I guess, you know, if you're in restricted areas, if there's trees around and things like that, it does restrict your ability to cast properly. So you've got to have the right space and the right conditions for that to work. With the spin rod, when you're bait fishing, they're shorter, so they're much easier to handle, much easier to get around. They don't have the bite indication on them, but they do have the ability to hold the rod and feel everything. So if you've got a nice graphite rod that's quite stiff, you can feel everything that's happening and then strike into it. It doesn't have as much give in it. It doesn't lift the line up as much, so with a really long rod you get a chance to lift a lot more line out of the water and actually make connection with the fish faster. So you actually, probably the strike rate potentially on the longer rod is better. But all in all, even though you know, the Quivertip outfished today, I'd say, I mean, I like them both under their conditions. Today I enjoyed the Quivertip the most, simply because I could see everything that was happening. If it was a windy day, it would have been the spin rod every time. So look, if you've had similar experiences, let us know. It'd be great to hear what your preferences are and what you've done before. Look, I've probably been here long enough. I've been here for a couple of hours, so I'm going to move on. If you've enjoyed the video, give us a thumbs up and subscribe. And if you're interested in any of the gear, if you're interested in the burley that I use, Bite Hard burley, my recipe for spicy chicken that works very, very well, go to my website, howtofish.com.au.